that we're trying to bring together, because it's quite disparate at the minute.
Thank you very much. One question from me, in that bringing those things together, will that, even though they really only had a chance to form and meet once, maybe twice, the Community Lands Trust, what their thinking is, or what they're projecting to do?
Yes, I think that's a quite critical part of any sort of housing strategy, that we understand what their role and function is and where they're at. I know certainly my colleagues Andy and others are working in that space, so we'll certainly be catching up with them to see how that's progressed. Obviously, given the current situation we're in, I know a board's recently been appointed, but we need to just find out where they're now acting in that space and what projects they might have on the radar.
Thank you. Right, let me just have a look and see if there are any hands up. No. Any hands up in terms of questions? Or otherwise we'll just go quickly and ask if there's any comments that you want to feed back to staff to inform that next look at this topic. Okay, Sarah.
Thank you, Paula. I actually didn't see the presentation until like 2 minutes ago, so just read it really quickly. So I'll probably email with some further thoughts. But Paul, would this, so this seems to be quite a comprehensive look at housing, opposed to just affordability or just, you know, any kind of one aspect of it?
Yes, that's right. I think what we've just tried to do in the presentation you've seen recently is just capture everything that's going on in the housing space, from our strategic direction, our planning side of it, and also the community discussions. And I think the next steps are really just to bring that together in a report once we've had the conversations internally, making sure we pick up on all those discussions, whether it's affordability or housing typologies or the Housing Lands Trust. So that's the goal. But if there's anything you think, please email me, and we can make sure we bring that back in the council report.
Okay, so the report's kind of like a, here's where we're at now, so where do you want to go next? Yeah.
I think so. We need to say, here's where we're at. Here's all those things going on in council around housing, not just housing affordability, and what are those key outcomes we want to see from a housing strategy. But I think the overriding feeling I'm getting from comments we've received over several months is there needs to be one document that brings all these discussion pieces together, so we know what we're doing in the housing space.
Okay, yeah, because I think along with affordability and you know, housing security and that kind of thing, accessibility. We had Jerry Pomeroy from the DPA get in touch recently. And she's part of the RHI, but and is representing the Disabled Persons Assembly, and we'll be talking a little bit this, I think, next week around how do we actually encourage a greater supply of accessible houses, and ones that are also quality at the same time. And the other thing is, you know, promoting that slightly higher quality housing in terms of, say, a home star rating of at least 6, where, you know, future houses are going to be more energy and water efficient and healthier for people to live in. So just pulling in those two threads would be good.
Great. No, thanks for your input. I've made a note of those points.
Thank you. Maxine.
Hi, thanks. I have had a brief look over that and have been involved in some of the other conversations around there, around the topic too. The thing I struggle with the most is, so what can council do about it? And I think that's one of the things that I'll be wanting to look at and have some understanding about, sort of practical things that we can do that solves or gets us to some of the outcomes that we identify, and you know, having access to other people to brief us around those sorts of things are really helpful as well when it comes to well-informed decision making.
Yeah, sure. I think that's critical. We need to know what levers we have available to deliver on the outcomes we're seeking.
Yeah, and the report will identify the, a number of those outcomes that we want to see. So it's a
Yeah, I think it's highlighting the outcomes we've heard from you so far on what we can do in that space. And then it would be for council, having read the report, to make a bit more of a clearer strategy that we will then can shape up. But obviously we have to speak internally around what we're doing already in this space and make sure we're aligned. And then obviously the next phase will be to develop a proper housing strategy, and that will involve speaking with external stakeholders.
And will it also have identify parcels of land that council has as a way of being able to, I don't know, maybe if we're talking about affordable housing and the Community Lands Trust and what other elements might be able to be used?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, obviously, council has some land available still that can go into that discussion, but we have to be careful about how we use that. That's in terms of like our property endowment fund. But obviously, the Housing Lands Trust, that's there for not just housing owned land, but also private developers. So it's how they can work in with joint partnerships as well. So it's not just all about council; it's how we encourage external parties to work with housing providers.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Look, listening to Sarah and Maxine in terms of the levers that council might have to assist in this area, I guess one of the levers we've got is that regulatory area around the RMA. And I noticed one of the slides has got that as a heading. What sort of feedback have you had thus far in terms of the government's proposed changes to the RMA, which might be beneficial to us in this area, in the sense of giving us one of these levers that we're able to influence to create this housing affordability?
I might jump into that, Paul.
Sure.
Councillor Rob, so there the government's recent advice in terms of the changes that they're going to make, we're expecting some further detail on that in the next week, and we'll share that with elected members as soon as we've got it.
Do you think it's going to be helpful to us in this area, the changes, a government indicating that the kind of changes that they will announce will be beneficial to help us in this area?
I'm hoping so. It'll be for large projects though. It'll be for large infrastructure, housing, environmental projects. Okay. I'll share it as soon as I've got it. We can have a conversation.
Thank you.
Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Jen, I've looked through the document and I'm particularly interested in the market-focused interventions that council can influence, in particular targeting revitalisation of the CBD and affordable apartment living. And reading through the document, I don't see those words in the same sentence anywhere. Maybe it's just that I haven't read it thoroughly enough. Can you help me where in the document, because I think that's been reflected by a number of elected members over the last 6 or 7 months, this idea of high density apartment, CBD, or maybe it's just me.
So the intensification conversation definitely should be reflected in the strategy, and we'll make sure that we pick up your comments.
Because can you point to me where it is?
It might be something that we've missed out of that, but we'll take that point and make sure it's definitely covered. Because you're right, it's a key theme.
Yeah, it is covered in. It comes under the kind of more regulatory framework. So we are required to provide intensification opportunities. So that will largely come back to you in the separate infill conversation as well about where the council wishes to further its intensification discussion in the city. But we do provide already in the central city those higher density opportunities. It's just for the market to bring those to the table now.
Yeah, because we really, I felt that there was a real call for us to be more proactive in that area. So I look forward to this other work that you're talking about, because I'm not seeing any detail in this presentation that refers to it at all. But I'm accepting you're saying that it's all covered under the intensification part.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we can bring back more detail in our report to you. Absolutely. This presentation today is really just those high-level principles, but certainly intensification is a core part of that housing discussion. So that's something we will cover off.
Yeah, I think Ewan raises a good point. It's about visibility of that factor within the policy is really important, because if you don't signal it, you don't see it either. Anyway, just one question for me, if I may. I was interested in the just trying to get on the right page now. The one that talked about the market, the blue arrow page, 54, and it puts a little red hashed circle. That's one. Thanks. Around the market rental and market ownership. And I'm just interested in how we're going to incorporate providing for the rental market as well as ownership, because when we talk about affordable housing, we quite often are talking about what is that?
Strange.
Anyway, it's not my, anyway, I'll try to ignore that. How we will provide for people to invest in a rental market, I suppose it fits in with all those other opportunities to lease to buy, as having the land equity, etc. But there's a whole continuum.
Yes, yeah, that's true. And the reality is we only really influence at this stage through our planning mechanisms the market end of that continuum, because council's not involved in that social affordable rented spectrum.
Well, no, I suppose sorry, I probably wasn't clear. Yes, we're in the commercial side, but some people are going to invest commercially to provide long-term rental stock.
Yes.
Some people are not everyone's investing commercially to flick it off. Some of them are holding it as an investment. And their needs may be slightly different from someone who's building 6 townhouses or a block of apartments to sell versus someone who's building something to be in a long-term rental market for whatever reason. And I just wondered, because that is so annoying, isn't it? Whatever that song is. Because not everyone is, in other countries, not everyone's going into private homes, but we're talking, and the Waikato Housing Project talks about people being, I love this terminology they used, well housed. So I know New Zealanders love to have a home and their lemon tree and rotary washing line and, you know, all the things we've always dreamed of. But actually what we want is people to be well housed in a warm, dry, fit for purpose home that they can afford to pay for. So I'm just wondering if we can flesh that out, or I can see more of the thinking around that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Sarah.
Thanks, Paula. Paul, just wondering where this conversation is going. To what extent will this also look at those possible solutions and levers? Because, like, is it still, just to clarify, is it kind of focused on what we are doing and stuff, or are we looking at more of those solutions as well? Because you know, in terms of what we can do around renting and things, there could be opportunities, for example, to work with community housing providers and the Community Lands Trust in that respect, which is what they've been doing in Queenstown by the looks of it, from some of the stuff that Scott Figgenshow sent through for his inclusionary zoning talk.
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. So, I mean, we do to some extent work with the likes of Accessible Properties and Habitat for Humanity already. The Community Housing Lands Trust was recently set up last year, and that's part of its role, that community housing partnership approach. So certainly,
Excuse me, Paul.
Yeah.
Just out of interest, because I've just been trying to find out where that irritating noise is coming from.
Paul.
It must be you, because you're the only one that's got your headphones on and your speakers on. Is someone playing music in your house?
My daughter's playing trombone in the back garden.
Right. Well, we were trying to trace it, thinking, what is that noise?
I do
You can't-
apologise.
No, that's all right. You can't hear it because you've got headphones on.
No, she has a set lesson, and I did tell her to go as far away as possible. So she's outside. She's playing a trombone in the gully, which echoes.
It's lovely. It's lovely.
Oh, please don't tell her I said it was irritating.
I do apologise.
You'll never support me or Paula again. Just don't tell her.
You told her to shut the hell up. You go on.
She did a very good dawn chorus.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, now that we know what it is, we'll try and not be put off by it.
Yeah, I can't hear them. Sorry, that's why I've got these on. So yeah, I apologise.
Sorry, carry on with your question. Was it along the lines of...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the difference between Hamilton and Queenstown is they've had a community housing trust for some 10 years now, because their affordability's been off the scale. So they've got an established body that's set up. So when you get into that housing conversation, the council, Queenstown Lakes District Council, would approach that housing lands trust and work with them when it comes to housing land availability, or working in partnership with developers. But they're also looking at mechanisms by which to acquire developers to work with the Lake Community Housing Lakes Trust, and that was done to some extent through that special housing areas legislation that we dabbled in a bit a couple of years ago before the government pulled that piece of legislation from the Act. I suppose the only other thing to remember is Kayanga Ora, or also that other body that works heavily in that space, i.e., building houses for social rented, or sort of that discount housing model.
Okay, cool. So just, I don't want to take up more time. So if it's, is it best that with just a few things I'm keen to see us consider as possible solutions, I just email it through?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to receive emails from anyone today, and we can build that into the report.
Yeah, look, and councillors, that's the same for everyone. Because next, when we get to a more detailed look at it, it's nicer up front to kind of know the sort of things we might include. I'm surprised, Sarah, that you haven't mentioned green standards for housing and how that fits. So I'm just going to raise it because I think it is the point.
She did 6-star.
Oh, okay, cool. Perhaps I didn't hear over the beautiful trombone. No, seriously though, yeah, I support that. Understanding if we're going to build a whole heap more houses, the things that we've talked about when we weren't under the stress of COVID, such as grey water or roof water, natural solutions to on-site water, and other green star factors might be encouraged across some of our new subdivisions, so we can sort of get some developers who are keen to lead the way there. Anyway, Ewan, you still got your hand up?
No, look, I'm sorry, I'll fix that.
That's okay. Thank you, everyone. So if you will just, because I'm not sure that everyone will want to comment on this, but if you want to make a comment, just raise your hand there, just like this, and I'll let you have a comment on this one, and then we'll move on to the other one. Can't see anyone. Oh, Jeff.
Thanks, Paula. Good work, Paul. Good stuff. And just echo you, and that looking forward to seeing more about intensity in the central city, and intensive housing in the central city, which absolutely has been a bit of a theme from elected members. So just echoing that point. But yeah, nice job.
Yeah. Sarah. Oh, yes. No, sorry, Max.
Just a parting comment. Thanks very much. Look forward to it. I think any planning that we do in the future will need to be anchored with a really good strategy that takes into account all the kinds of housing that we're able to have an influence over here in the city, and also thinking about ways that not just punitive ways that we can make people comply with what we've got, but some incentives to really be able to drive the kinds of outcomes that we do want to be able to see. I think that's another really important lever. We've got the DC in the city advantage that could be explored and looked at more widely into other areas that we do want to be able to find development in. And I think it's also really important that we don't just think about it as a greenfields response as well, that there's that intensification and infill stuff that really does need to be resolved, and some really good solutions. And I'll be looking for some practical ideas that we can use in order to be able to leverage what we'd be able to see. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Martin?
Very quickly, obviously, just the other work we're doing, the presentation yesterday was really good. Just the holistic approach. So it's what we do outside a particular housing development. Obviously, you want a good housing design development, rather than the concrete jungle approach, but what do we do in terms of the streetscape, the footpaths, the lighting, the vegetations, treescape, and how close is the nearest public green space, park, etc., safe roads, cycleways. So it's just avoid silo thinking. So good design, so it's working with all these groups to ensure that we do our bit. And anytime anyone wants to come on a tour with me to look at some terrible examples of 1970s design within the rules, even then within the rules, we want to avoid all of that stuff if we can. Just can't stress that highly enough. And the fundamental thing is, would you want your kids or grandkids to live in any of the developments we'll be looking at? Over now.
Thank you. Just another thing for me to put in. We've been working towards this for a long time, and thanks, Jen, to your team. Thanks, Paul, for the good work that you've been doing, pulling all this together. We're in a different world now than we were 40-something odd days ago, and you like me will be reading all the stuff that says house prices might drop 40%, or then. There's a speculation, there's a lot of economic speculation about the availability of people to build houses and materials coming into New Zealand, construction materials, whole heap of things that are more in the spotlight now than they were before. So I just want to understand how any housing strategy that we have remains responsive to those things, whether we have to slow things down, but speed things up, do things differently. That kind of thing. I presume we've still got a predicted need for we've got a lag in housing, so I need to understand what that looks like now, what's the existing need, and what the new revisions of policy might look like. Not policy, population, given that migration is going to slow down for a while. And so we just need to make sure that we keep that front and centre, so nothing gets locked in an inflexible way, and binds us to doing certain things that are hard to pull back from. That's my view anyway. Okay, that's that one. Thank you, everyone. We're going to leave that there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Apologies for the trombone background.
No, that's fine. It was just we were all a bit bemused. We're trying to do a little bit of investigation as to where it came from. And then it just occurred to me it could only be you. It's all good.
Anti-social distancing.
You can make her day and tell her we all thought it was beautiful.
I enjoyed it.
I will do that, but
Thank you.
I'll make sure the next session is timed so she does it at
All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, thank you.
Right, councillors, we're on to our last topic of the day, which of course is STV. Just trying to get back to my run sheet. Who's talking to this, Becca, in particular?
Yeah, me. And I've also got Dale of Soski here joining us today, who's Council's electoral officer. And then I've also got Dan Silverton, who is one of our awesome comms advisors who's worked with me on putting the community engagement plan together. So I've circulated the information. At this stage, I'm happy just to take questions or input into that information.
Okay, so put your little blue hands up and we'll go around. Hi Dale, long time no see, Ish. Good to see you.
Yeah, hello everyone.
Right, so we'll go through the questions as they pop up. Hang on a minute, let me just get my list of the blue hands here. Okay, so first one I can see is Martin.
No.
No questions. Maxine.
Not at this point.
That's okay. Maxine.
I guess, you know, my questions here, thank you for the work that you've done on it. It looks like you've done a really excellent job of being able to present it, and the style of presentation is really good as well. Thank you. Supported by all those other documents. The part that interested me the most was the consultation, and that's going to be fairly soon by the look of it, and under some probably pretty extreme circumstances, really, in terms of the COVID level that we'll be at and the restrictions of that. So I did have some questions. Let me find where they are with regard to how you might engage the public around that. There are already some really well-established community groups that we could be communicating with, and I'm thinking our schools, definitely. They have great networks of newsletters that go out to their parent population, and you know, via email often, or on electronic means. There's also the union movement as well, who have an extensive database of contacts for their members, and who most of them understand really clearly the benefits of democratic processes, and also understand the need for the additional education that they might have to get around that. So I just wonder if you can talk a little bit more about what that communication strategy might include and involve.
Yeah, sure. Dan, feel free to jump in here with this as well. So obviously we are a little bit constrained by time in terms of what we can do. Typically in the past, I don't think, and some of the councillors that have been around for previous reviews may be able to correct me on this, I don't think we've done any sort of upfront pre-engagement on this issue in the past, in terms of what we're sort of proposing this time around. So it's a bit of a new process in terms of going out ahead of the time, because this process is a little bit different because it involves a poll and the legislative process that follows once a decision is made. But essentially, more than happy to sort of get the engagement out to as many places as we can. Most of it will be done electronically, so there's absolutely ability for us to flick it through to every and any network that we can through our community advisors. I'm happy for all of you to obviously use your networks to circulate pre-engagement surveys out as well. So yes, absolutely willing to do, to get it out as far as we can. In terms of the education campaign that we're sort of putting together, so Dan probably can give you a bit more of a heads up on what that may involve. We're still sort of developing exactly what it will look like, but the aim is to make it really simple and to explain the two systems in a really easy to understand way, because what we don't want to do is put, you know, people off getting confused, looking at it halfway through and then switching off and not engaging because it's too hard to understand. So does that kind of answer your question, Councillor Erneston?
Yeah, thank you. I guess it's about being able to get it out really widely, and I'm more than happy to use whatever networks that I have enabled to enable that, but that asks that council think about that as well.
I can probably speak to that a little bit, and just to your first point, this comms and engagement plan was written a number of weeks ago, or started a number of weeks ago, even prior to Alert Level 4 starting, and definitely a lot longer before we knew when the annual plan consultation was going to be. So those were some initial dates that we'd penciled in, but they're definitely not set in stone. And when we do engagement like this, the Andy Mannering's team, the community development team, are a vital resource for us. So they're one of our links into the likes of schools and unions and a whole lot of other networks across the city to get the engagement out to the community. And just to expand on what Becca said, whenever we do this type of engagement, we look to replicate it in hard copy for those non-digital citizens as well. So it'll just depend on what alert level we are at the time, whether libraries are open or people are able to access hard copy forms from a library via some kind of collection system, or we might have to replicate the engagement in a newspaper or something like that.
Have you thought about, like, look at us now, we're using this kind of online platform, and at lunchtime today I was on a webinar as well, which was really informative. I had no idea how many people were on there, presumably quite a few, and that they can cope with quite a lot. Is there some kind of a format that we might be able to look at in terms of the education part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely, and we'd probably have to tap into Dale's expertise to be available for one of those sessions.
Yeah, and I think I can add to that. I think that's a great idea, Maxine, and I would be more than willing to run a couple of sort of public informationary Zoom sessions to, you know, do a Q&A session like we've done with previous topics. So yeah, absolutely, we can look at doing that.
Yeah. Do we have to fund this all from our own pocket?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so during the election time, there are those lovely little orange suited experts that are around that help sign people up to the electoral roll and to give information about the process, etc. Will we have access to that resource as well?
So you're talking about the Electoral Commission. So typically they haven't played a part, to my knowledge. Dale, you may be able to jump in here on this, but they're sort of more around the enrolments rather than the electoral system. I can have a chat to them to see if they might be able to assist in some way. I haven't actually thought about approaching them on this, to be honest, so more than happy to follow up that line as well.
Yeah, my view is that they will not be available, unfortunately. They do focus on the electoral roll currently at the moment only. Certainly there will be no finances or money that will be available other than within the council.
It just strikes me that this is a really good opportunity to enrol people around, you know, a pretty significant discussion around our democracy, and that leaving that piece out of it, you know, is a lost opportunity.
I think I agree with you absolutely, Maxine, and you know, this would be a great opportunity from my perspective. So I'm definitely willing to just touch base with their management over there and to see whether it's something that they might like to partner with us in terms of enrolments. Because again, that's a key focus of theirs. We could certainly follow that up.
Just remember that the parliamentary elections, if they're still held in September, then the Electoral Commission will be very well. They do a main mail out, etc., in the beginning of July already for the parliamentary elections. So they probably won't want to be sidetracked at that stage during July for what you're suggesting. We could ask.
Can only ask. I have to say, just picking bouncing off that one, another suggestion would be to look and see whether any of our neighbouring councils or councils within the Waikato district Waikato region, are doing something similar, and therefore joined up. We could have a joined up campaign about some of it, I think. Anyway, sorry, I jumped in there. Maxine, have you finished? Yep, you have. Perfect, thank you. Angela.
Thank you. Hang on, I just need to get my document. I really liked the idea and brilliant. Well, I thought the reading Becca and the template was absolutely brilliant. I loved it. I like the idea of actually the people voting on their preferred choice on the website, because that moves people into the space of one day having online voting, hopefully. But a question to Dale, have you been involved with a process, Dale, where a council has switched from first past the post through a poll to STV? And if you have, what do you think was the success element?
There was one recent one. New Plymouth District Council moved to STV in 2019 without the need for a poll. So simply they resolved to move to STV. They would need to discuss closer with them what education or preliminary information that went out to their electorate. But they moved seamlessly to STV without the demand for a poll.
And there was no appeal?
No. Well, they had to get their 5% of electors, which they didn't get.
Okay. Dale, did you take any notice of the first election on STV after they switched? Did voter participation increase?
It pretty much stayed the same between FPP and STV. We did a little bit of analysis for those councils that have moved, and it's pretty much the same. So you don't get a dramatic increase or a dramatic drop.
Right. Okay. It's interesting. And just I guess from a communications perspective, for me, it feels, I think I've been through a couple of these now. If the green document in there is sort of a draft, I guess, of what we're going to be going out with, I think it looks a bit too, I don't know, the language.
If I could just jump in, Angela, that was the, sorry if that wasn't clear in the material that was circulated. So I absolutely agree with you. That was the document that went round with the last poll in 2013. So that was just sort of by way of showing you what we did last time. But I absolutely agree that the new information would be a little bit more engaging.
I was going to say, because it didn't look anything like Nat Palmer's work.
No,
and I guess from just feedback on the communication side of it, we're never going, we're not going to get people to really open up and understand STV as an issue and the benefits if we're just talking about the process through the comms rather than the benefits of, we have to be fair, of both systems. So yeah, I'll be really keen on seeing that when it comes back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had Dan and I have had, and Nat, I know has been in conversation with Dan as well around this, and will be heavily involved with this. But I want it to be a really, really engaging, engagement campaign. Essentially, we need to get the outcomes that we're after, which is to know what the community think about this, and to do that, we need to be really engaging and innovative in what we're doing and exciting. So I agree 100%, Councillor O'Leary, that is definitely our goal. And I guess once we've got more of an idea in terms of exactly what it's going to look like, we will circulate that information to you.
Great, thanks, Becca.
Margaret.
It's a question for Dale. I was trying to discern between the two methods of voting, and what's the biggest advantage of or the biggest difference between FPP and STV, please?
STV is perceived to give a better diversity around the council table. So it's perceived to give more balance between to reflect better your community. That's its main advantage. Having said that, there have been a couple of councils that were on STV that moved back to FPP, the main reason being that it actually didn't deliver anything different. So I found that was interesting, but basically that's the main benefit.
Yeah, that's what I kind of thought. But I found it interesting that actually the reality of our last election showed us to have the most diverse council that we've had ever. So to me, that kind of refuted one of the main reasons or the main points of difference for STV change. And I am a little bit of the mind where if it ain't broken, then don't fix it. Second question is, explain to me what the wasted vote is, please.
Okay, just a minute. I'll just get Judith in for that one. She's right here.
Hi, everyone.
James Castle, isn't it?
There's no actual thing as a wasted vote. I mean, that's what people say. People will refer to a wasted vote. there's no physical thing as a wasted vote. So that when people say, "Oh, there's a wasted vote," it's an opinion.
For FBP.
For first past the post, they say, if my vote didn't go towards getting someone elected, then that means my vote has been wasted. On the other side, if I under STV, people will vote in different ways. They may only vote for the number of vacancies. They may not rank every candidate. And once their preferences have been used in the iteration process, then their voting document is no longer of any use. So it could be considered to be wasted as well. So I think it's just a matter of opinion. Some people, if they vote for first past the post and they see a result, they say, that one of those votes was mine for that person or those people. You can't see that under STV. It's not so transparent. But as far as the wasted votes go, I think that's probably just an opinion.
Thank you. I really appreciate that explanation, because again, that comes up in the comparisons and the literature, that FPP is a wasted, it includes a wasted vote. And I do think that's very emotive. I don't think it's factual. And as Judith just said, an opinion. So I would be very uncomfortable with that kind of language being used in any part of the communication around these two different voting systems. Yeah. I don't know how anybody else feels, but I mean, I've never understood the wasted vote thing, because I personally think that all my votes are worthwhile, regardless.
I think the key for us is just keeping it simple for the public in terms of these are the benefits of each system.
That's not simple. It's actually confusing when you have a wasted vote. It's like taking me on another version of, well, what does wasted mean? And it's just an opinion. I think it's best if we stick to the facts. But anyway, that's my input. Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Becca. This question's probably for you. I just wanted to be 100% clear on the process. So we vote on whether we want to have a poll or whether we just vote directly on this issue, because it says, can you run me really briefly just through the exact process of our decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think actually I'm going to defer to Dale on this one, because he's a lot more experienced and will be able to explain it better than I can.
So by 12th of September, Council has to come to a view about whether they wish to change the electoral system or not. So that's the first milestone. So prior to that is your community consultation, your communication amongst yourselves, what's best for the council, and council will then come to a view and a resolution. And the resolution may simply be we wish to retain the status quo or FPP, or if we wish to move to SEV, then that's the resolution. Following that decision or that resolution, then council has to then do a public notice by the 19th of September. And that's the opportunity for 5% of electors to mount a poll. So does that answer your question, or are you looking earlier on, sort of the June, July, August timetable?
No, I think that makes sense. So we decide through a vote through councillors, because I'd thought there was the option to also, not advocating for any option here, but to choose to go directly to a poll as well. Is that correct? So
yes,
you can.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So just to clarify, Sarah, if I could jump in, because I think I know where you're going. So you can either, as the council, decide to do a poll yourself, or you can wait to see if the community has the desire or the want to request a poll. And there's two different ways you can do a poll. So you can do it as a standalone poll, or you can do it, which is what we did last time round, which was that it is part of the next elections. And I guess that the drawback with, the benefit of doing it with the elections, if you wanted to do it at all, is that it's a lot cheaper to do it that way. The disadvantage is that it doesn't come into effect in terms of the outcome of the poll until the subsequent election.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. But if we're doing really good community engagement, presumably, you know, we should feel comfortable that we kind of understand community view anyway. So then we'd be in a position not to need that. Okay,
that's the goal. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Ryan.
Sorry, having some technical difficulties there. Thanks, Mayor. Just following on sort of from Margaret's questions, probably for Dale. In the report we've got, it talks about the disadvantages of FPP generally are less representative, and has obstacles to minority candidate election. But then 1 or 2 pages on, you say it also is dependent on those that put themselves up for election, which was Margaret's point. And we've seen obviously a big shift in the latest election. So does that in some ways make that point moot, or is it still strengths to STV?
You can't elect diversity if you don't have diversity amongst your candidates, I think is the critical thing. So if you don't have diversity, then you're going to get what is the people that are standing. Basically, there's no diversity. If you have diversity, then one of the points or positives of the STV is that more of that diversity through the candidates may be elected.
Can you just elaborate how that works? I still don't understand why, or how does STV empower that more? What's the tipping point that does that?
Okay, so with STV, it's designed to give more value on a higher value for minorities. So if under a first past the post election, you've got 10 candidates and you've got 5 that are more prominent, 5 that are let's call them minorities, then under STV, those minority candidates have a higher chance of being elected. It's designed to stop political parties. So in the case of big cities where they have political parties, because it's one vote, single transferable vote, it's one vote, no matter how many vacancies there are, you have the opportunity to rank candidates. And so if you've got a party, the people that are voting for that party out in the community are generally going to vote for their first preference, their second preference, their third preference for that party. And so what happens with STV is after the first iteration of all the first preferences being counted, then the candidate that is polling lowest at that point gets excluded, and all the people that voted for that candidate get their second preference allocated. And so you can see that gives a bit more weight to the minority voters or minority candidates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I just, in some ways, I know it's trying to create equity, but by favouring the minority, isn't it potentially biasing results?
Well, that's the thing that you have to decide.
If I could just jump in here, Ryan, I don't necessarily think that it's necessarily favouring minority. I guess that, and this is a challenge that we have in communicating it effectively and getting it across the community as well in terms of these things that we're working through. So in terms of, basically the votes get transferred, is my understanding, Dale and Judith. So once the people sort of ranked in order, and then if you say your first preference has a whole bunch of, I'm probably not explaining it properly, but I think it's more around the transfer of voting numbers that's pertinent here and what we're talking about. Dale, you might want to just clarify my talk on that. That's what may have confused a few people.
Yeah, so I'm confused. So
sorry.
Ask that again.
So I think it's just more around, I was just trying to get to the STVs more around, you know, the wasted votes being, you know, not being wasted and being transferred.
Oh, we just had a conversation about wasted votes. Okay, to move this forward, I mean, I guess it is up for councillors to kind of look very carefully at what each system will deliver. We're just being told what the mechanisms are and what the step for consultation is at this point in time. We're not actually having to make a decision either about which one we favour right now, personally, because this is all, as you say, Ryan, it's the right sort of thing, asking the right questions. But any values that are applied to that probably comes down to council. So I don't know if we can get any closer to, you don't look like you've had a really satisfactory answer to your question, Ryan, but I'm not sure how to get any closer to one.
No, that's okay for now.
For now, it's going to ponder upon it. Let's see what how we feel at the end when we come to our wrap-up comments. Sorry, let me just see who else has got the hand up. I've got Mark.
Thank you. Dale, this is for you, and please don't think I'm trying to be comedic or trite here, but this is the kind of, this will help me greatly when I'm explaining it to people who ask me, why are we doing this? Because we see a lot of, you know, it's obviously it's a very loud and vocal group, the STV proponents, and that's cool, but most people don't understand it. So in one breath, can you please explain to me as a voter what I am doing here? What is STV as opposed to first past the post? Big breath, just one breath, because it's an elevator pitch. And I'm not being smart or cynical. It's just I need to be able to understand it that quickly.
I guess I'll just take one of these points from the brochure that was put out in 2013, where it says STV is a proportional electoral system. Proportional systems are intended to provide more effective representation for all significant points of view, although it cannot be guaranteed that STV will provide an increased diversity and representation. So that's about the positive, what it's all about. It's about increasing diversity.
Okay.
That's a heck of a breath.
Yeah, so I was going to say.
I saw it then, I thought that probably sums it up quite nicely.
Yeah, no, and look, I think that's really what I'm trying to achieve, is to try and simplify this thing to make it really crystal clear so people know what they're choosing.
Yes.
Because I'm finding that quite confusing myself at the moment. I know there's a million different iterations of it, but I've just got to be able to crystallize it. Thank you.
Electors won't need to know how it actually works, the mechanics of it, and the quotas and the transferring and that sort of thing. It just really needs that simplistic, higher level view of what I've just said.
Yeah, I guess they just need to know what they're making a choice on. Really, it's as simple as, and what's in it for them. Yeah, thank you. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to remember also that it's that the health board, until it was abandoned, was also STV. So people had some actual living experience of doing it, whether they understood it entirely or not. I've got Martin next, I think. And I'll Ryan, you've got your hand up again, eh? Yeah. Okay, so I'll come back to you. So Martin next.
Yeah, apart from Waikato, the health boards around the country still survive, and that's a system they use. So please note the Waikato situation is, if they keep health boards, it's but a temporary phenomena, and their democracy will return within 2.5 years. Number one, I with respect, I don't want to give away the notion of a wasted vote. I think there could be further discussion because, for example, we've had a mayoral election where the winning candidate got only about 30% of the vote under first past the post. So 70% of the people who had no say in that could argue that their vote was wasted. Dale, could you confirm for the mayoral contest, roughly, and this is, I think, a very important aspect of the STV system, roughly, the usual successful candidate under STV for a mayoral contest is usually the first or the second choice of about 50% plus one.
Yes, 50%
plus one. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if we're going to talk about democratic outcome, that's a very crucial point. would you also argue that the people will stand and say, "Oh, don't stand against that, that candidate because you'll waste the vote, you'll split the vote." In effect, that doesn't happen because ultimately the preferences still travel to the ultimate successful candidate. So the notion of vote splitting under STV perceived would be less. Because that's where the issue of the wasted vote. If I vote for some person for mayor who doesn't have a show, I'm technically wasting my vote, but I still want that candidate to be there to promote arguments, because ultimately my second or third preferences still travel.
May still
travel.
travel.
Yeah. Look, I went to a diversity thing hosted by the political science department in the pre-election, and
Martin, just hang on a second. Is this a question? Because we will come around.
It's actually a question. We had a really good presentation on living wage from the University of Waikato. Could I ask Becca and the staff what input our politics department, for the taxpayer money we pay for them, has had? Because clearly I would assume that they'd have quite a bit of background detail, particularly in terms of, e.g., have they done analysis of what it looks like in Wellington, Dunedin, Tauranga, where we has STV, just in terms of some practical examples? Have we had any input from them, or would we be seeking input from them? Because I'm talking about the research, just broadening and deepening the discussion and information. To Becca.
So you're talking about in terms of the electoral system review, Martin, specifically wanting more.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about, one would assume that they've done a heap of research around that diversity, because obviously there's a perception, I think correctly, that STV does improve your chances of having a more diverse council in terms of representative the whole spread of population, in terms of representing the totality of Hamilton's categorised population. I'm just wondering, I would expect the local poll science department at the uni to have done a heap of research, and particularly I'd be interested in their analysis of, say, the Dunedin, Wellington, Tauranga, cities of similar size to us that have STV.
I can certainly follow that up. There's lots and lots of information out there on this, and there's lots of differing views on this, and there's been quite a few papers that I included in the information that I sent through around sort of trying to explain the difference between the two systems, and I guess the outcomes of STV versus FPP and the diversity that it may or may not bring. So certainly happy to follow that up a little bit more. Dale, did you have any comments around that aspect in terms of the research being done in this space?
It's really been led by Otago University. I think Dr. Janine, you've got her paper here, haven't you, attached to your report, Janine Hayward. So she's done a lot of work in the past, and I think she's continuing to do more research. So in the first instance, I'll probably touch base with her to see what up-to-date information is available.
Yeah. So there is a paper. Yeah. So sorry, Martin. There is a paper. Her paper is attached to the end of the information that I circulated, and she really well outlined in that paper sort of the differences in it, and it goes into quite a bit of detail. So if you haven't read that, I would encourage elected members to. No,
that's fair enough, and I haven't, and I freely confess I haven't read that paper yet. But Dale, thank you very much. All I'm wanting to seize on here is some practical examples in the information pamphlet. Which part of America has STV? That could be a kiss of death for proponents of STV, to quote the US example. Where in America has that happened?
Massachusetts, I think.
Well, I think with respect, it's probably a very unhelpful reference, unless you say the grand state of Massachusetts.
No, it's the Commonwealth, Martin.
Climate, that would be helpful.
It's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Showing no bias at all. I'm very apolitical on America, of course, and the current
Commonwealth, Martin.
Commonwealth.
Okay, moving on, please. Moving on.
Thank you.
Questions finished? Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet Ewan has said it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Ewan, you're marvellous. I'll come to you for information.
Jeff.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Yeah, I'm just following on from what Margaret was saying, and probably Ryan as well, I think, just in terms of some of the information that we're putting out to the public in terms of, I'm still trying to, obviously got an open mind on this. In terms of the advantages and disadvantages, we've got here advantages for STV, a more equitable minority representation. Now, we've kind of also heard from Dale that a number of councils have actually tried it and thrown it out because they didn't find that happened at all. So I'm wondering how much proof there is, or if that's perception. And secondly, a reduction in the number of wasted votes. And we've heard today that that's from, sorry, I didn't catch your name next to Dale, that's more, right, thank you, that's pretty much an opinion rather than a fact. So we've got 4 points here, and I guess I'm just a little bit worried. Are we putting out facts for people here or urban myths?
I'm not sure if you can answer that, but
Oh, I think I've got the answer to it.
I guess the legislation.
Should we be actually? I mean, what research is there on it in terms of the number of councils who've tried it and what they've discovered? I mean, we keep telling people you're going to get more minorities. Well, as Margaret pointed out, we did pretty well at the last election with what we've got. So I'm just sort of feeling, okay, are we comfortable putting out urban myths to the public? I'm not.
And Dale might want to jump in here, but I guess there's legislation around sort of the information that we do put out has to be neutral in terms of just outlining, you know, the key bits of information. And I guess the ministry provides guidance around what information we are able to put out to the public. Of course, we can be a little bit more innovative around how we communicate that in terms of using different tools and things. Dale, did you have any commentary around that?
Yeah, that is correct. The legislation says that the council must be neutral in the information that it puts out. And I think City Council came and stuck a few years ago where it had a biased view and had the public with a biased view and got pulled over the coals for that. Whatever information we put out, and this applied to the 2013 information insert that went out with the voting documents, was provided and approved by the Department of Internal Affairs. So anything that we put out, I think we should have it vetted by the Department of Internal Affairs so that it is accurate and factual and not myths.
right, and then there's a degree of how people interpret some of the outcomes, but that's fine. You're right, we need to put out something that is balanced, factual, and then democratic in the sense that the community are able to choose for themselves how they vote. Okay, so who have I got next? Kish. And Becca, there's 3 people in the waiting room for some reason.
Hi, just following on with some of those questions. Hi Dale, do we know what portion or proportion of councils at the moment use FPP versus STV throughout the country?
Yes, it's in the report, Becca's report. I think there's 11 that use STV and 60 something that use FPP.
And so has there been any work done? I noticed that the Otago University, like the information's 2004, 2007. Have we done any recent work to check whether those STV using councils, has it resulted in greater diversity, or is that just a principle?
Well, I believe, well, I can't answer that. I don't know whether any recent research has been done, and that's why I suggested we start with Janine Hayward to see whether anything more recent from where 2008 has been developed. But certainly we've got the evidence of, it was actually Thames Coromandel District Council and Manamata Piaka that moved back to FPP. What we could do is look at those councils that have just moved to STV, that's Tauranga City and New Plymouth. We could look at and talk to them and look at the makeup of their council in 2016 and 2019 to see whether that has had any effect. So we can do those sorts of things. Wellington and Dunedin have used, and Porirua have used STV for many, many years, I think since it became available in 2001, I think, or 2004.
So how does that, like, who do we ask to do that work, or can that come back to us?
Yes, we could leave that with us, and we can certainly make those inquiries, and we could even go as far as chatting with the Department of Internal Affairs as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Seems sensible. Sarah. Hope I'm not missing anyone.
Thank you. I'm interested by the perception that having more women on council means more minority groups, given we're 50% of the population. But anyway, moving on from there. One point, I guess, one thing I'm interested in is actually beyond looking at whether this, increases diversity or the proportion of minority groups on council. It's the aspect of actually having more choice as a voter. So my understanding is that, you're able to, there's less concern about voting, and then if it's not one of the two kind of front runners, then it's a waste of time. So you kind of don't get that choice. So by being able to rank your preferences, you can have a true kind of number one is your true preference, and then know that if that falls through, it will go to your number two preference and number three and that kind of thing. Would you, is choice kind of like a major component here as well?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it just gets very complicated trying to explain how STV works, and you've got to really look at how along with that, how the voters vote, and a lot of voters will only vote like in a mayoral election or a two-person race. They'll only vote for one person, or they'll only vote for the number of vacancies. So if you've got 3 vacancies and it's first past the post, they get 3 ticks. If it's STV, they get 1 vote, no matter how many vacancies, but they can rank. I don't really know how much more detail you can go into.
I suppose we could do some analysis, say, of the District Health Board, where it has had STV, and let's say there are 30 candidates. How many electors voted for 7, ranking up to 7? How many up to 14? How many up the whole 30? We could do some analysis like that, and that would illustrate sort of that flexibility.
I wonder if, I guess, the way that people who use STV, whether they perceive that they have a greater ability to choose candidates that they want to as well, if that's something that there's research on.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Yeah, okay, good point. And I think there's voter psychology and voter behaviour to be considered in here too. Choice and to what extent people exercise their choice. Because if you've got to tick 12, you could get fed up after 6. Too much hard work to go right down to the full 12, But just a matter of how do people commonly behave when given choices would be interesting, but anyway.
Oh, sorry, one other thing is just, I'm interested in whether, if say you could look at the Auckland election, let's leave Hamilton for a moment, and you had kind of the newspapers almost chose 2 front runners from the very beginning, and so as a voter you would, look at that and go, well, any vote beyond that is wasted. But as a potential candidate, I think there's a lot of issues with STV in terms of then if you that it puts potential candidates off, because if it's perceived there's already a front runner, then you might split votes. So that issue of people worrying about splitting votes, I think, could potentially detract from a more diverse range of candidates actually running. So could we have more information on that as well? I don't know if there has been research, but it would be interesting to know.
We'll certainly make some inquiries around the traps to see what is out there, and with Becca try and pull it together.
Yeah, did that make sense, by the way?
It does. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Maxine.
Oh yeah, double bite, sorry. I'm just interested in the quota as well. There's a certain number that a successful candidate needs to be able to reach. and then past that, there's no point in counting any more votes for that person, and then those votes are transferred to another one. It's my understanding of how it works. Do we know what the quota is prior to the voting, or tell me how that quota is?
Made up of the total number of valid votes, so number of voting documents received, divided by the number of vacancies, plus 1, and plus your percentage, your 0.0000.
9 decimal places, yeah.
And that quota changes with every iteration, because if you've got a number of vacancies and people have just put 1, then their voting document is only useful for that one preference. And so then every iteration you're getting that quota, total number of valid votes divided by the number of vacancies plus 1. And so as soon as a person's voting document runs out of preferences, that quota is going to keep dropping as you go through the iterations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, actually. I can understand that clearly. But that quota isn't known at the beginning of the voting process until all the votes are in, the people who choose to vote.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And then just the last little thing, in terms of the communications and education piece, have, Becca, we thought about how to communicate with large employer groups? I'm thinking, the DHB, the university, Wintec, Fonterra, as a broad example. There's likely others that I don't want to list, about how to engage them through that process and what we might be able to do to do that.
So I guess again it comes back to we'll sort of like we'll put it out as far and as wide as we can do. Dan, did you want to jump in on this one in terms of sort of how we disperse the the engagement document and getting the feedback?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we've got going back to previous 10-year plan consultations, we've got huge lists and databases of employer and community group and government organisation contacts that we will feed it out through.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
I'm just going to whiz through these last questions because we need to draw this to a close. It's coming back to us. Margaret.
Thank you. Just one last question. Just to make sure that I understood it correctly, I think, Dale, you might have said that doesn't matter which system you use, it really comes down to who runs. Was a general summary?
Yeah, it was. You can't elect diverse candidates if you don't have diverse candidates standing.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you. Cash. No, your hand was still up. Okay. No one's. I don't see anyone else's hand. Ryan, thank you.
Just really quickly, I think following on from Martin, is there an unintended consequence, i.e. when the Mayor of Wellington got elected when she was the number 2 from everyone, as I understood it? Is that what you'd consider an unintended consequence?
I don't know anything about that. I don't know about that sort of thing because all I do is the processing, just there for the processing. But if you think about the way that it works, if you've got a couple of standout candidates, if we're talking about the mayoral candidate, if you've got 2 front runners and you've got a whole lot of other people, then if one of those 2 candidates doesn't reach the quota, then the lowest candidate is excluded and those votes are redistributed. And then if they still don't reach the quota, that same process goes on. And so if you've got 2 political leanings for those 2 candidates and the bottom, then it's up to, that's what I said before about having more value on those lower votes, because they are going to change those candidates that are excluded, and the people that voted for them, their second preferences are going to change, can change between those two front runners. Yeah. And that is how the person that under FPP could have come second, under STV could come first.
So potentially you could get an unintended consequence.
If that's what that means, yes.
Thanks.
Okay, Mark, I think. No, Mark's hand's gone down.
It's down, sorry.
Okay. All right, councillors, if you would like to, we're going to wrap up with our questions. Obviously, we've raised probably more questions than not all of them have been able to be answered today. So we'll pick up on those for the next time that we come to this topic. We haven't got a whole lot of time, Becca, with the timeline that you've given us. So how will you be able to satisfy councillors, apart from, you know, the people that will draw our own point of view on the information you've given us, the gaps in the information?
Yeah. So I'll attempt to get the information that we've talked about and send it out to elected members. If we need to hold another discussion, more than happy to do so. Once I've got a really good idea of sort of, you know, the gaps that we're missing in terms of the explanations and the research that you're after. So I'll go away and work with Dale and Judith and Dan and to bring you back something a little bit more concrete. The report coming back to council is scheduled to come back to the 6th of August council meeting. We have got until the 12th of September, so if we need to push it out a little bit, we can do that, aiming of course not to do that. I think all the information's there, it's just putting it in a conducive way for you guys to understand it and to have a little bit more in-depth knowledge around the research done in this space.
But it did seem from some of the questions that councillors raised that were some gaps in the research that may have occurred, we hadn't seen any research on a couple of areas that were highlighted anyway.
Yeah,
so
we may not be able to sort of do the research in the time, but we'll certainly see if there's research existing research, or if we can do some analysis on the information that we already have. Bring that back.
Yeah, we need all the information that we can possibly have, because otherwise, you know, you're making a decision on part of the information potentially, or it might sway somebody one way or the other.
Just to clarify, I have a lot of all of those links that go through to the STV website, to the ministry's website. There's a whole bunch of information, background around statistics and analysis there. So I'm going to just go back through and just pick some of the key things out just to send it to you to make it you know, easy to look at. But there is definitely, I've included everything that I can possibly find in all of the information that I've sent through, but definitely have a look and see what else we can
okay. So councillors, we'll have a quick brief. I'll go around to left to right down the page to see if anybody's got any parting requests, comments. We're not debating it at this point in time. We're just trying to shape the debate. So we'll just quickly go through, and then that's our last topic of the day. Maxine.
I don't think I've got anything more to add. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Martin.
Just Ryan, I'll have a chat to you around the coming second, because basically if you don't get enough first preference votes from the beginning, you drop off anyway under STV. But look, what I would like, I think it would be really better and good to get thorough research with Wellington and Porirua, who've had STV over a number of years. That's number one. And number two is under first past the post. As you know, most councillors don't get 50% of the vote on the first go. Some councillors get elected with 24, 25% of the vote. What's happened to the other 75%? With STV, eventually you get enough to get across the line if you're elected. I do think it would be very good to have some further analysis even of our own mayoral elections. And look, as you well know, I was the deputy mayor to the previous mayor, who I'm a friend and supporter of, but I want to acknowledge that it's not ideal where the mayor gets across with just 31, 32% of the vote, because that's telling me the other 70% didn't necessarily get their choice for mayor. So I'm just wanting, I have an open mind, of course, you always have to have an open mind, but I just want a little bit of nuancing around some of this stuff about what we mean. I mean, in the end, you may want to stick with the status quo, but I think some of that research would be genuinely useful. And thank you for this brilliant work done. Thanks, Dale. Thanks to both of you for your presentation. And certainly I'll be definitely reading that Dunedin research further. But thanks, Becca, as well. Really useful session. Thank you.
Well, yeah, it was. Thank you. Who have I got now? Ewan.
Nothing to add.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you, Dale and Judith and Becca. Yeah, look, I too am completely open-minded about this. I'd also really like to understand the cost of education. How much of that do we bear? And the comms, what's the cost for that? Because this is a fair chunk of work for us to get the message through and to really have people understand what it is that they're doing, rather than just, you know, a lolly scramble and it's tick, 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 or 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever it might be. But I want us to focus on, I think it's really important to focus on what's the purpose of this, what are we trying to achieve? And I think that's the crux of the whole thing. What outcome are we looking for? Diversity, opportunity, representation, yep. And which of the two systems is that going to bring us?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Dave?
Not much. I support going for STV in principle, though I do note always to myself that FPP's been successful for me 8 times in a row, and why change a winning combination? But I think we should take the next steps towards giving that a chance.
Thank you. Cash? Cash? No, thank you. Ryan? No. Jeff?
Yep, 2 quick things. One, just a quick response to Sarah regarding the minorities thing. What I, and fair call, but what I really meant was there was a lot of concern over the last term about the lack of women on the council, which I shared, and it's good to see that that's been restored to where it should be. In terms of what Martin says, the only issue I'd have there is if we're going to get research on other councils, let's not just do it on a couple of success stories. Let's be balanced, and you know, if we do it on 2 councils where it's worked well, then let's do it on the 9 where it didn't work, perhaps as well. You know, but I don't think you've got a lot of time for that anyway. So it's probably a big ask. I'm just saying, if we're going to get information, let's make sure it's balanced both ways, so we can make a good call. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks again, Becca, for putting together the pre-briefing report. I did find some of the explanations today not very clear, personally, and I think that I would personally like to have the opportunity to talk to someone else as well about and ask questions. So maybe someone from the Waikato University who's a political scientist there, like we did with David Cameron. Sorry, what was his name? Is that his name?
Michael?
Michael Cameron. Michael Cameron's kind of, you know, independent report. I think something like that would be really helpful, because yeah, I felt more confused listening to some of the explanations today. And in terms of some things I'm interested in understanding better, I've mentioned them, but the impact on people's decision of whether or not to actually run as a candidate, whether different systems have a different impact on people's decision making there, and also the ability for people to feel empowered in the way that they vote. Does it change between the 2 different systems?
Thank you. Rob?
Nothing from me, thanks.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to take the opposite position of what I normally take, and that is one of an open mind and a closed mouth.
Angela?
No, nothing from me.
Okay, I think that's everyone. Thank you, everyone. From my own perspective, we're looking here for the best information again to inform us. So if you have some unanswered questions that pop into your mind, then send them to us or send them to Becca as soon as you can, because we want to have a really informed debate. But the only thing I will say about that is this is not just about what this council wants, it's what the voter out there in the community wants, what suits them, what meets their needs as well. And so that's why getting this clearly articulated to the community and giving them plenty of time to digest what is in fact a very complex debate, we've just seen that in our own questioning, is really important. They need plenty of time to understand, and it should be fully democratic that the public can decide what suits them best. And that's of course coming from the mayor who lost by 6 votes the first time round. And who knows, we could speculate, would STV with second votes have delivered me across the line then, or would have given the preferred candidate a better advantage? You know, those are the kinds of nuances that you get into. But at the end of the day, it's about people's being fair and allowing the wider community to determine how they elect their city leaders in this instance. So that's what I think anyway. All right, thanks everyone for the conversation. Thanks for you've managed to keep feisty and on-point questions going all day on a number of really big topics. I appreciate that. So I'm going to liberate you now from the Zoom room and see you again tomorrow.
Hey, Mayor Paula.
Yes.
Isn't there one more PX item for me?
There is. Okay, you're right. Sorry, some of these things happened more latterly.
I didn't feel liberated.
Oh, you can't go now. I'm sorry to bring you back in. We're going into PX. I just need to let get Becca to let us know.